In this video, I'm going to share with you everything you need to know to start shrimp keeping. We're going to cover housing and heating and feeding and filtering and breeding. By the time we finish this video, you will know everything you need to know to get started in this fabulous hobby. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Richard and I'm the author of the Neocaridina Shrimp Handbook. So let's begin with which shrimp we're talking about. And in this video, we're particularly focusing on the Neocaridina davidi, the red cherry shrimp. And that can be red, obviously, or they can be green jades or blue dreams or black diamonds, or there are dozens of different colors they come in. But essentially, all this information applies to Neocaridina shrimp and not to the Caridina shrimp or the Sulawesi shrimp or any others that might be available. Let's start with tank size. Now, in reality, it doesn't matter what size tank you keep your shrimp in. You can keep shrimp in a 1 gallon tank or a 1,000 gallon tank. It doesn't actually matter. But if you're new to the hobby, then I recommend you start with a 5 or a 10 gallon tank as your first tank. Why do I recommend that? When it comes to keeping shrimp, one of the keys is keeping the water stable. And it's far easier to keep 1,000 gallons of water stable than it is to keep 1 gallon stable. Essentially, the more water you have, the more water volume in your tank, the easier it is to keep that water stable. And stability might mean temperature, pH, KH, GH. There are a number of different parameters we don't necessarily need to worry about today. What we need to concern ourselves with is being able to keep that volume of water stable. If you're brand new, get yourself a 5 gallon, get yourself a 10 gallon. Bigger is better if you've got it, and start there. These tanks behind me, these are 7.5 gallon cubes. They're absolutely perfect. But you can essentially keep shrimp in any container you want to, providing it holds water and you can keep that water stable. So once you've got your tank, the next thing you need to think about is filtration. So why do we need filtration? Well, filtration essentially does two jobs. One, it keeps the water physically clear. It removes debris from the water column and takes it away so you can enjoy your shrimp. Essentially, the shrimp don't care about bits floating around in the water. If you ever look in a natural watercourse, the visibility is nowhere near as good as we have in our tanks. There's always bits and bobs floating around in the water. But for us to enjoy our shrimp, we really want that water to be as clear as possible. And a filter's first job is to take the debris and remove it from the water column. A filter's second job is to provide a home for beneficial bacteria to live on. Now, what are beneficial bacteria? Beneficial bacteria are microscopic bacteria that sole purpose in life is to convert the fish, or the shrimp in our case, to convert their waste from highly toxic ammonia, and ammonia will kill your shrimp very quickly, and convert it through to nitrite, which is less toxic than ammonia, but will still kill your aquarium inhabitants, and convert it from nitrite to nitrates. And nitrates in very high concentrations will still harm your fish and your shrimp, but the fish and the shrimp can typically survive in the levels of nitrates that do build up in our shrimp tanks. Now, there's an argument for carrying out water changes to reduce those nitrates down, but we'll come back to that later. Now, after filtration, we need to talk about heating our shrimp tank. Now, shrimp are incredibly versatile and they can live in a wide range of water temperatures, anywhere from 57 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 14 to 30 degrees centigrade. But as mentioned previously, they don't really care where they are in that temperature band. What they care is that that temperature is stable. If you keep your shrimp at 58, and then during the day, the temperature rockets to 78, and then at night it's dropping back down to the high 50s, and the next day it's yo-yoing back and forth, even though you're within that band, your shrimp are going to suffer. They're going to be stressed out by the constant changing. If you keep your shrimp at 78 and they sit there or thereabouts at all times, they'll be happy. They love stability. When it comes to shrimp keeping, if there's one secret everyone needs to know, it's stability. And in fact, I always try and preach stability is better than perfect. You don't need to strive for perfect conditions. You need to strive for stable conditions. So whether or not you heat your shrimp tank will be decided by whether or not you can keep the water temperature stable without heating it. I don't heat any of my shrimp only tanks, although I have heaters where I also have fish in with them, because I know the temperature in my room remains more or less stable day and night. And the shrimp don't care as long as they've got stability. So with tank size and heating and filtration covered, let's talk about how you're going to decorate your tank. What are you going to put in that tank for the benefit of the shrimp? Now, the first thing we need to consider is substrate, and substrate is essentially whatever we put on the bottom of our tanks. Now, here's a little secret for you, and you may hear other people on YouTube saying otherwise, but essentially, shrimp don't care. Shrimp don't care what's on the bottom of their tank. In my own tanks, I use regular gravel. I also use fine grit that you might pick up from a garden centre. I have fluval stratum, not because it benefits the shrimp, because it's great for planting in. I have some bare bottom tanks. I have essentially used whatever I happen to have. Now, some people on YouTube will tell you have to have a special substrate for this and a special substrate for that. And when it comes to some of the more delicate shrimp, some of the shrimp that require a super low pH, that may well be true. But if you're keeping cherry shrimp, if you're keeping members of the Neocaridina shrimp family, whatever you choose to use as a substrate, the shrimp won't care, providing it doesn't actively alter your water parameters. If you're using limestone chippings, for instance, they will release calcium into the water, and that will affect your pH, your GH, your KH. It can affect your water parameters. But providing whatever you use is essentially inert in water, the shrimp won't care. They will be happy. And the same is true of rocks. If you want to use blue rocks, white rocks, black rocks, if you want to use a SpongeBob castle or a pirate ship, the shrimp won't care. All the shrimp want is something to climb across, something to grow biofilm on, something to hide behind if they ever feel threatened or stressed. But they don't care what that decoration is made up of. They don't care what you provide them, as long as they've got something to climb on. In my experience, if you keep shrimp in a bare bottom glass aquarium with no plants, no decorations, they don't tend to do well. They do like to have something to clamber on. They like to have something to climb behind. We even want to encourage algae to grow on these surfaces because the shrimp love to pick at the algae. But what you use in that tank is entirely up to you. The shrimp won't care. With that said, there is one type of decoration that I think shrimp do care about, and one type of decoration that I think can make a genuine difference to the success of your shrimp tank. And that is live aquarium plants. Now, I grow live aquarium plants in every single one of my tanks. Even when I've got a quarantine tank on the go, I put live plants in it. It's got Java moss in it. Live aquarium plants, firstly, make the tank look more natural. And I really should say natural, because there's nothing natural about any of this, really. But they do give it a more natural feel. But more importantly, as the plants grow, they absorb waste from the water. They absorb the aforementioned ammonia and nitrates from the aquarium water as they grow. They're nature's filter. They make the aquariums safer and cleaner for the shrimp to live in. They also provide spaces where the shrimp can hide and feel safe and tuck themselves away. A large clump of Java moss, which is my favorite plant to keep with shrimp of all time, a large clump of Java moss seems to increase the number of babies that survive, especially if you keep your shrimp with fish. Baby shrimp are incredibly tiny, and when the female first releases them, they need to tuck themselves away for a week or two, otherwise they quickly get eaten. Plants, of course, also provide places for biofilm to develop. If you ever look into a shrimp tank with live aquarium plants, the leaves are typically covered in shrimp. The shrimp are eating the biofilm that's developing on those leaves. If you're not familiar with biofilm, it's essentially that slightly slimy texture that everything that's been in an aquarium gets. It's made up of microscopic bacteria and crustaceans and the starts of algae. And shrimp love it. Shrimp spend their entire day eating, picking at the biofilm, picking at the starts of algae, eating the bacteria that's developing on these leaves. If you want to add only one thing to your shrimp tank, I cannot recommend live aquarium plants enough. So during this video, I have touched on water parameters. I have mentioned pH and KH and GH. And whilst going into those specifically is beyond the scope of this video, suffice to say, Neocaridina shrimp, cherry shrimp really want the pH to be somewhere between 6.5 and 8.5 pH. They want the GH, or general hardness, to be around 6 degrees of general hardness, or 110 parts per million. And they want the KH to be from 2 degrees of hardness, which is about 40 ppm. And if you're not 100% familiar with KH, pH, GH, TDS, whatever it might be, at the end of this video, I will link to another video that explains all of that in more detail. Okay, so let's assume now we've got our tank. We've set it up with heating and filtration. We've chosen a substrate. We've added some rocks. We've got some live aquarium plants. Next, we need to get ourselves some shrimp. And one question I'm asked all the time, like daily at least, is how many shrimp shall I start with? And the reality here is, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if you start with 5 shrimp, 10 shrimp, 15, 20, 100 shrimp. Whatever your budget is, will be absolutely fine. And the reason is, those shrimp, if they're happy, if you do your job properly, will quickly multiply. Now, you don't want to start with 1 shrimp. 1 shrimp can't multiply. If you start with 2, you've got to guarantee you've got a male and a female, and then everything's got to go perfectly so they increase in number. But if you start with 5, if you start with 10, if you start with 15, unless you're very unlucky, the chances are you will have at least 1 male and at least 1 female. And they will eventually, hopefully, breed, and you will have 40, 100, 300. Before you know it, you'll be damn near overrun with them if you do your job properly. So don't stress on how many you should start with. Have a look in your local area, have a look online, see how much shrimp go for, work out what your budget is, and just buy that many and get started with that many shrimp. Another question I'm often asked, and I see asked on forums and such like, is people worrying, how many shrimp can I have per gallon? If I've got a 5-gallon tank, what's the maximum number of shrimp I can have? And in reality, the answer is probably in the thousands, and that would look ridiculous, and most people wouldn't let it get that far. When my wife and I used to breed shrimp commercially, we had small tubs which we bred our shrimp in, and we had 2,000 or 3,000 shrimp in each tub. And that didn't present us with any issues at all. So don't worry about how many you should have per gallon, because in reality, the chances are you'll never hit that number. And if you do, it's probably in the thousands anyway. Okay, so we've got our tank, we've added substrate and rocks and plants and heaters and filters, and shrimp are now in there. So what on earth are we going to feed these guys? Shrimp are detrivores, and detrivores mean they eat pretty much anything that's decaying. In the wild, they would eat dead bugs and dead shrimp even, and dead fish, and decaying plant leaves, and fruit and nuts that fall in the water, and pretty much anything they come across. They are not fussy at all. Sadly, they're often sold into the hobby as scavengers, as cleanup crew. People are often told, just chuck them in your tank, you don't need to worry about it. And whilst your shrimp can survive just scavenging on leftover fish food and eating fish poop and dealing with the occasional dead fish, if you want your colony to grow and to thrive and to show the best colours and produce lots of babies, you need to actively feed them. Now, I feed my shrimp pretty much any good quality sinking pellet. There's no point in giving them floating food, although they will come to the surface occasionally and take the odd bit of food. They do want the food on the ground. Any good quality sinking food. If you've ever tried Rapashi gel food, that's amazing for feeding to shrimp because it's a lump of food that sits on the bottom and literally gets swarmed with shrimp. They will also take frozen bloodworms or daphnia or brine shrimp or pretty much any food which has previously been alive and has been frozen and is sold into the aquarium trade. In fact, bloodworms is one of the best food you can give to your shrimp to build them up, to bulk them up, to help the females produce more babies. I feed my own shrimp frozen bloodworm all the time, several times a week. And if I'm actively trying to build a colony of shrimp, I might feed them bloodworm every single day. Of course, this does beg the question of how much you should feed and how often you should feed, and that will depend on your colony. How much you feed will depend how many shrimp you have. It will depend what you're feeding them. How often will depend how quickly they're eating the food that you're putting in. My advice is whatever your colony is, put a small amount of food in and then have a look. If within 5 or 10 minutes that food's all gone, maybe next time you put a bit more food in. If you're putting food in and after 5, 6, 7 hours there's still food left, maybe you're putting too much in and you want to add slightly less. Typically within a week or so, you can dial in the amount of food your shrimp will eat pretty much spot on, as long as you add it and monitor. And do bear in mind, over time, the colony will grow. Just because they take 2 pinches of pellets today, in 3 months' time, you might have 3 times as many shrimp. They might need 3 times as much food. Add the food, monitor your shrimp, take your time, and adjust accordingly. And that way, you'll get it dialed in. You'll know exactly how much food your particular colony of shrimp wants to eat. So let's assume at this point, we've got our shrimp, they're set up, they're happy, we're feeding them, they're looking superb. What about breeding? Look, in reality, if you have at least 1 male and at least 1 female, and they are at least 4 to 6 months old, and assuming they're not 2 years or older, they will breed. feed them well, keep the water stable, they will breed. And when they breed, what typically happens is when the female is ready to breed, she will molt. And molt means they pull themselves out of their old skin and they've got a new, larger skin underneath. She'll pull herself out of the old skin and she gives off what the males think is the most wonderful, sweet smelling pheromone. If you ever see a male shooting around your tank, zooming all over the place, the chances are a female has molted, she's giving off that pheromone and the males are looking for her. She only has a very small window in which she can breed. Once her exoskeleton hardens back up again, she won't be able to breed. So she's molted, she's given off her pheromone, the male finds her. When the actual breeding doesn't take long at all, and the female will pass the eggs down her body and hold them. The fertilized eggs, she holds them under her legs. And she'll hold them there for about 30 days, give or take. Once the eggs are fully developed, the female gives them a good old kick, the babies come out of the eggs, and they're away. They're essentially fully formed cherry shrimp, essentially. They're fully formed, they're ready to go, they're completely independent. Once the female kicks those babies out the eggs, she takes no further part in their parental care. Now, if you keep those shrimp in a shrimp-only tank, you'll find the numbers rise rapidly. If you keep them with fish, I've got some with some celestial pearl danios, with guppies, with a betta, some of those babies will get eaten. And at first that does seem sad, but it does help keep the balance in your aquarium and stop your numbers spiraling out of control if that's not what you want. If you're breeding commercially, if you want to sell some of your baby shrimp, then naturally you don't want fish in there because you want every single baby to grow up to a sellable size. You want to maximize your profits typically. But if you just want to keep a small tank with some fish, with some shrimp, provide plenty of cover for those babies, and every generation, some will survive and your numbers will slowly increase. And that for me is part of the fun of breeding shrimp, is seeing the colony grow. So I did mention I have another video which goes into depth about KH and GH and pH and TDS. So why don't you watch that video next? Thanks for watching.